25. That was the number of men who had walked into the library of the Blackwood estate. And 25 was the number of men who had been dragged out their careers and sometimes their fingers broken. The greatest cryptographers from MIT master locksmiths from the Swiss underground and historians from Oxford. They all failed. They looked at the puzzle with arrogance. But in the corner of the room, invisible to everyone, was a girl making $12 an hour scrubbing the floor. She didn't have a degree. She had a debt. And she saw what the geniuses missed. This is the story of how Sophie Miller solved the impossible in 60 seconds and accidentally made the most dangerous man in New York fall in love with her. The air in the library smelled of stale cigar smoke, expensive scotch, and fear. Mostly fear. Sophie Miller kept her head down. It was the first rule of survival in the Moretti household. Be furniture. Be a lamp. Be a rug. Be anything but a person with eyes and ears. She squeezed the dirty rag into the bucket, the grey water swirling like a storm, much like the one raging outside the heavy velvet curtains of Blackwood Manor. Another failure, a deep voice rumbled. It wasn't a question. Sophie flinched, but she didn't look up. That was Domenico Moretti, the Don, the capo dei capi of the East Coast. He was 32, dressed in a bespoke suit that cost more than Sophie would earn in 10 years, and he possessed a face that could have graced the cover of GQ if it wasn't usually splattered with the blood of his enemies. "He claims the mechanism is jammed, boss," another voice said. That was Alessandro Domenico's right-hand man. He was older-scarred and looked tired. Sophie scrubbed a spot of red wine out of the Persian rug. Or maybe it wasn't wine. She tried not to think about it. In the center of the room, sitting on a mahogany desk under the glare of an industrial lamp, sat the object. They called it the Devil's Heart. It wasn't a heart, though. It was a dodecahedron crafted from obsidian and reinforced with titanium bands rumored to have been commissioned by a mad Russian oligarch in 1927. It didn't have a keyhole. It didn't have a digital pad. It had 4 concentric rings of symbols, Cyrillic zodiac alchemical, and Roman numerals that rotated independently. Inside that box was the ledger, the only thing that could save Domenico's empire from the federal indictment looming over his head like a guillotine. "Get him out of here," Domenico said, his voice terrifyingly calm. 2 guards stepped forward and grabbed the man standing by the desk. It was Professor Sterling, a man Sophie recognized from the news. He was a tenured professor of mechanical engineering at Columbia University. Now he was weeping. "I need more time," Sterling begged, his glasses sliding down his sweaty nose. "The internal tumblers are shifting. It's not mathematically consistent. It's a Fibonacci sequence, but it breaks at the 13th integer. Please, Mr. Moretti." "You had 6 hours," Domenico said, finally turning around. He held a glass of amber liquid, his knuckles white against the crystal. "You said you were the best. You lied." "It's impossible!" Sterling screamed as he was dragged toward the heavy oak doors. "No one can open it. The friction gears are rusted. It's a myth." The doors slammed shut. Silence rushed back into the room, heavy and suffocating. Sophie held her breath. She moved her hand slowly, wiping the floorboards, praying the squeak of the wood wouldn't draw attention. "That's 25, Dom," Alessandro murmured, pouring himself a drink. "We're running out of options. The Fed agent Miller, he's going to have a warrant for the estate by Monday. If we don't get that ledger out and burn it, the family is done," Domenico walked to the window, staring out at the rain lashing against the glass. I don't need you to tell me the odds, Al. I need a solution. Get the guy from Berlin. The guy from Berlin is dead, Alessandro said flatly. Car accident last night. Or at least that's what the report says. It was the Russians. Domenico smashed his glass against the fireplace. The sound was like a gunshot. Sophie jumped, dropping her scrub brush. It clattered loudly against the wooden floor. The sound echoed. Every muscle in Sophie's body locked up. Stupid. Stupid, stupid, stupid. Domenico turned slowly. His eyes were the color of cold espresso, dark and stimulating, but currently filled with a lethal irritation. He looked down at the floor, seemingly noticing her for the first time, despite the fact she had been cleaning his library every Thursday for 3 months. What is that? Domenico asked. The Maid boss, Alessandro said, sighing. Sophie. She's harmless. Her dad owes the loan sharks in Queens about 50 grand. She works it off here. Domenico took a step toward her. Sophie stared at the toes of his Italian leather shoes. Get out, Domenico whispered. I don't want anyone in here. Yes, sir, Sophie stammered. Her voice was raspy. She hadn't spoken in hours. She scrambled to her feet, grabbing her bucket. But as she stood up, her eyes betrayed her. She couldn't help it. It was a curse she had lived with since she was a child. A condition the doctors called hyper-observant pattern recognition, but her father had just called being a know-it-all. She looked at the obsidian box on the desk. She saw the rings. She saw the symbols. She saw the position Professor Sterling had left them in. He was wrong, Sophie whispered. It was so quiet, she didn't think they heard her. She turned to run toward the service entrance. Stop, Domenico commanded. Sophie froze. What did you say? She turned around, clutching the handle of her dirty bucket like a shield. Nothing, sir. I'm sorry. Domenico walked over to her. He towered over her 5'4" frame. He smelled of sandalwood and danger. You said he was wrong. The professor. You think a maid knows something a Columbia engineer doesn't. Alessandro chuckled darkly from the corner. Dom let the girl go. She's probably high on cleaning fumes. No. Domenico's eyes narrowed. He was desperate. Desperation makes men listen to strange things. Why was he wrong? Sophie's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. If she spoke, she might die. If she didn't speak, she might die. But the puzzle was screaming at her. It was itching in her brain. He was trying to use a Fibonacci sequence. Sophie said, her voice trembling but gaining strength. He was treating it like a math problem, assuming the maker wanted it to be perfect. And Domenico crossed his arms. It's not perfect, Sophie said. She looked at the box, entranced. The obsidian on the 3rd ring, there's a microfracture, tulte hairline. It's not from age, it's from stress. And the symbol aligned with it is the alchemical sign for lead. So, lead is heavy, Sophie murmured, almost talking to herself now. Lead sinks, but the 4th ring is air. If you align them mathematically, the gears grind. I heard them grinding when the professor turned it. He was forcing the math, but he was ignoring the story. Domenico stared at her. For a long moment, the only sound was the grandfather clock ticking in the hall. The story, Domenico asked, his voice low. The maker, Sophie said, looking up into Domenico's dangerous eyes. He didn't build it to keep mathematicians out. He built it to keep people out. He built it based on weight. Lead drags the mechanism down. You have to compensate for the gravity of the lead symbol by counter-rotating the air symbol 3 degrees past the click. Alessandro laughed. 3 degrees past the click? Listen to this nonsense. Boss, she's wasting our time. Domenico didn't laugh. He looked at the girl. She wore a shapeless grey uniform. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun. She had no makeup, dark circles under her eyes, and hand red from bleach. But her eyes were sharp. They were dissecting the box from across the room. Put the bucket down, Domenico said. Boss, Alessandro warned. Put it down. Sophie set the bucket down. Go to the desk, Domenico ordered. Sophie's legs felt like jelly. She walked across the expensive rug, feeling the heat of the lamp as she approached the desk. Up close, the devil's heart was terrifyingly beautiful. It seemed to hum with malice. You have 1 minute, Domenico said, pulling a silver chronograph watch from his pocket. Professor Sterling took 6 hours and failed. You say he was wrong. Prove it. And if I can't? Sophie asked, her hands hovering over the black stone. Domenico didn't answer. He didn't have to. The silence said everything. Then you never leave this room. Start, he said. Sophie closed her eyes for a second. Breathe. Just breathe. It's just like the old clocks Dad used to fix. It's just a machine. A machine has a language. She opened her eyes. The room blurred out. The threatening presence of the Mafia Don faded. Alessandro's skepticism vanished. It was just her and the box. 25 experts. They all looked for the code. I need to feel the weight. Sophie didn't look at the symbols right away. Instead, she placed her fingertips lightly on the cold obsidian. She felt the vibration of the room, the thunder outside the heavy footsteps of the guards in the hall. 50 seconds, Alessandro announced, checking his phone, looking bored. Sophie spun the 3rd ring. It was heavy, gritty, lead. She felt the resistance the professor had fought against. He had tried to push past it. Sophie didn't push. She let the weight settle. She felt the internal tumbler drop, not with a click, but with a thud. There. 40 seconds. Now the 4th ring. Air. It needed to be light. She spun it counterclockwise. It moved too freely, almost spinning out of control. Most experts would try to stabilize it. Sophie let it spin, listening to the whir of the bearings. Wait for the friction. Wait for it. She stopped it abruptly. It wasn't aligned with the arrow at the top. It was off-center. She's breaking it. Alessandro stepped forward, hand reaching for his holster. She's misalignment the primary axis. Dom, stop her. Let her finish, Domenico said. His voice was tight. He was watching Sophie's hands. They weren't the hands of a pianist or a surgeon. They were rough working hands. But they moved with a delicacy that mesmerized him. 30 seconds. Sophie ignored them. She was sweating now. The logic of the box was twisting in her mind. Lead sinks, air rises. What binds them? Fire. The 2nd ring. The zodiac. She found Leo. Fire. She rotated the Leo symbol until it sat directly between lead and air. The box gave a low groan. It sounded like stone grinding on bone. 20 seconds. Girl, step away, Alessandro barked. You're going to trip the acid trap. Acid trap. Sophie's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't known there was an acid trap. If she forced the next move, a vial of sulfuric acid would shatter inside, dissolving the paper ledger instantly. Her hands shook. She pulled them back. "She's choking," Alessandro scoffed. "Time's up, sweetheart." "No," Sophie whispered. "It's not fire. It's water. To quench the fire." She looked at the first ring. Roman numerals, 1927, the year of the Great Mississippi Flood. The maker was Russian, but he died in America. The story was about drowning. 10 seconds, Domenico said. He stepped closer to the desk. "Make your choice, Sophie." It wasn't Leo. It was Aquarius. Sophie grabbed the second ring. She didn't turn it gently this time. She snapped it hard to the left, aligning the water bearer with the lead. Clack! The sound was loud, violent. Then silence. Nothing happened. The box sat there, black and imposing. "Time," Domenico said. He sounded disappointed. He actually sounded sad. "I'll take her to the—" Click. It was a soft sound, a whisper of steel. Then hiss. Steam vented from the seams of the dodecahedron. The heavy titanium bands suddenly retracted with a mechanical whir. The top of the obsidian pyramid split open like a blooming flower, the petals of stone folding backward. Sophie gasped and stepped back, bumping into Domenico's chest. He didn't move. He didn't push her away. He stood there, rigid, staring over her head. Inside the velvet-lined center of the box, untouched by time or acid, sat a small leather-bound book. The room was absolutely silent, the kind of silence that happens when a miracle occurs in hell. Alessandro dropped his glass. It didn't break. It bounced on the rug, spilling scotch everywhere. "Holy Mother of God!" Domenico reached past Sophie. His arm brushed against her shoulder, sending a jolt of electricity down her spine. He picked up the book. He opened it. He scanned the pages. "It's all here," Domenico whispered. "The accounts, the judge's bribes, the offshore codes, everything." He looked up. He looked at the 25 shattered chairs where the experts had sat. He looked at the millions of dollars worth of security equipment they had brought. Then he looked at Sophie. She was hugging herself, trying to make herself small again. I should finish the floor, sir." Domenico closed the book. He tossed it to Alessandro, who caught it like it was a live grenade. "Leave us," Domenico said to Alessandro. "Boss, we have to move the—" "I said, leave us." Alessandro looked at Sophie, then at Domenico. He nodded slowly, tucked the book into his jacket, and walked out, closing the heavy doors with a respectful click. Sophie was alone with the devil. Domenico walked around the desk. He leaned against it, crossing his ankles. The aggression was gone, replaced by a terrifying curiosity. "Who are you?" he asked. "Sophie Miller, sir." "Just the maid." "Sophie Miller." He tested the name. "You just saved my life, Sophie Miller. You saved this family. Do you know what that means? That I can keep my job?" she asked hopefully. "My dad. We really need the money." Domenico laughed. It wasn't the cruel bark from before. It was a genuine, bewildered laugh. He ran a hand through his dark hair. "Your dad owes 50 grand. Yes, sir. To Mr. Vinny in Queens." Domenico pulled out his phone. He typed a text message and hit send. "Done?" "Sir." "Your debt is cleared. Vinny won't bother you again. In fact, Vinny works for you now, if you want him to." Sophie's jaw dropped. I don't understand. You solved the riddle of Saint-Glaire in 58 seconds without tools, Domenico said, stepping closer to her. He reached out and took her chin in his hand, tilting her face up. His thumb brushed her cheek rough against her soft skin. You are not a maid anymore, Sophie. What am I? She breathed, lost in his dark eyes. You're the most valuable thing in this house, he murmured, and I never throw away valuable things. Sophie shivered. It wasn't fear this time. It was something else, something hot and confusing. But Domenico's voice dropped an octave. Now you know my secrets. You saw the ledger. You know what was inside. I won't tell anyone, Sophie promised. I swear. I know you won't, Domenico said, his thumb tracing her lower lip. Because you're not leaving. The experts who failed, they left. You succeeded. That means you belong to me now. Sophie pulled back, eyes widening. Belong to you. My enemies will know the box is open, Domenico said, his face hardening again. They will know someone cracked it. If they find you, they will torture you to find out how, or to make you crack their codes. You are a target now, Sophie. The only place you are safe is right here, by my side. I can't stay here, Sophie said, panic rising. I have a life. I have a cat. We'll get the cat, Domenico said dismissively. Go to the east wing. Third door on the left. It's the guest suite. There are clothes there. Burn that uniform. Mr. Moretti. Domenico, he corrected. And don't make me ask twice. I'm not used to asking at all. Sophie looked at the door. She looked at the man who had just bought her debt and stolen her freedom in the same breath. She realized with a sinking feeling that he was right. She had opened Pandora's box. There was no going back to scrubbing floors. She turned and walked toward the door he pointed to. Just as she reached the handle, Domenico spoke again. Sophie. She paused. Yes. That click, he said, looking back at the obsidian box. It was the most beautiful sound I've ever heard. He wasn't looking at the box anymore. He was looking at her. Until you spoke, he added. Sophie flushed crimson and hurried out of the room. Domenico Moretti turned back to the window. The rain was still falling, but the storm felt different now. He touched the glass. He had the ledger. He had the power. And now he had a mystery girl with the mind of a genius living in his east wing. He smirked. Things were about to get very interesting at Blackwood Manor. But Domenico didn't know that the box was just the beginning. The ledger wasn't just a list of accounts. It was a map. And by opening it, Sophie hadn't just saved him. She had started a war. And the first shot was about to be fired tonight. The east wing of Blackwood Manor was not a room. It was a sanctuary carved from old money and silence. Sophie stood in the center of the bedroom, clutching her elbows. The carpet was so thick her cheap sneakers sank into it. There was a 4-poster bed large enough to sleep her entire family. A walk-in closet filled with dresses that still had tags from designers she had only read about in magazines left behind in the trash, and a bathroom with a tub carved from a single piece of marble. But the door was locked from the outside. Sophie walked to the window. It was reinforced glass. She could see the grounds below, guard dogs patrolling the wet grass, men in dark raincoats, standing by the gates. I'm a prisoner, she whispered to the empty room. A soft scratching sound at the door made her jump. The lock clicked, and the heavy door swung open. Sophie backed away, grabbing a heavy brass candlestick from the mantel. But it wasn't Domenico. It was a young guard holding a plastic carrier. He looked terrified to be there. He set the carrier down, muttered, "Boss said to bring this," and practically ran out, locking the door behind him. Sophie knelt down. Through the grate of the carrier, a pair of green eyes blinked at her. "Whiskers." She opened the latch. Her tabby cat, missing half of his left ear from a fight with a raccoon in Queens, sauntered out. He sniffed the air, looked at the silk bedspread, and immediately jumped up to knead the expensive fabric with his muddy paws. Sophie let out a sob that was half laugh. Domenico Moretti, the man who dissolved enemies in acid, had sent a convoy to Queens to fetch her cat. "You like it here, huh?" She scratched whiskers behind the ears. "At least one of us does." The door clicked again. This time the air in the room changed before the door even opened. The temperature seemed to drop, and the scent of sandalwood and rain filled the space. Domenico entered. He had changed out of his suit into a black button-down shirt, sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle and ink. He held the leather book, the ledger in one hand, and 2 crystal glasses in the other. "I trust the accommodations are acceptable," he asked, his voice smooth, betraying none of the stress of the impending federal indictment. "You locked me in," Sophie said, standing up. She didn't put down the candlestick. Domenico eyed the brass weapon in her hand and smirked. "I locked the world out, Sophie. There is a difference. Put that down before you hurt yourself." He walked to a small table and poured a drink. "Come here. I need your eyes again." Sophie hesitated, then set the candlestick down. She walked over, keeping the table between them. "I opened the box. You said that was it." "I lied," Domenico said easily. He slid the ledger across the table. Opening the box was the physical test. This is the intellectual one." Sophie looked down at the open book. The pages were yellowed parchment, but the writing wasn't English. It wasn't Russian. It wasn't numbers. It was music, rows and rows of musical notation. Treble clefs, bass clefs, notes scattered across staves. "My accountants have been staring at scans of these pages for 2 years, Domenico said, taking a sip of his drink. "They tried to play it. It sounds like garbage, discordant noise. We assumed it was a substitution. Cipher A is C-sharp, B is B-flat, but it doesn't decode into anything readable." Sophie looked at the notes. Her mind, the curse and gift that never let her rest, began to trace the lines. She saw the ink density. She saw the spacing. "It's not music," she said softly. Domenico leaned forward. "What is it?" "It's a map," Sophie said. Her finger traced the rise and fall of the notes on the first measure. "Look at the stems of the notes. Some go up, some go down. And the flags, single flag, double flag. And it's the skyline." Sophie looked up at him, her eyes wide. "It's the New York skyline, from the perspective of the harbor. 1927. Domenico frowned, moving to stand next to her. He was close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him. "Show me." "Here." She pointed to a cluster of high notes. "That's the Woolworth building. The sequence of the notes matches the height ratios of the skyscrapers. If you overlay this onto a grid of the city, it gives coordinates." Domenico finished, his eyes lighting up with a predatory gleam. The Russian didn't write down bank account numbers. He wrote down locations. "Locations of what?" Sophie asked. "Vaults," Domenico breathed. "Physical vaults, the old way. Gold, diamonds, bonds, untraceable wealth." He looked at Sophie with an intensity that made her knees weak. You just made me the richest man on the East Coast, Sophie. Does this mean I can go? Domenico closed the book. He reached out and tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered on her neck. Her pulse hammered against his skin. You still don't get it, he murmured. You're the only one who can read the map. You are the key, Sophie. If I let you go, the Russians, the FBI, the Triads, they will hunt you down. They will peel your mind apart to get what's in this book. So I'm trapped, she whispered. You're protected, he corrected. His face moved closer to hers. The air between them crackled. And I protect what is mine. Sophie didn't know if she should slap him or kiss him. The adrenaline of the puzzle mixed with the danger of the man was a potent cocktail. But before the moment could break, the lights went out. Total darkness swallowed the room. Stay down. Domenico's voice was a growl. A siren began to wail in the distance, not the police, but the estate's internal alarm. What's happening? Sophie gasped. We have a breach, Domenico said. She heard the distinct sound of a gun slide being racked. Someone is in the house. Domenico grabbed Sophie's arm. His grip was iron. The panic room is behind the wardrobe. Go. Take the cat. What about you? I'm going to kill whoever cut the power, he said calmly. Wait. Sophie pulled back. Her eyes were adjusting to the gloom. The emergency red lights in the hallway were flickering on, casting long, bloody shadows across the floor. The power didn't just cut. The backup generator takes 10 seconds to kick in. It took 3. Domenico paused. So it wasn't cut from the outside, Sophie said, her mind racing through the blueprints of the house she had memorized while cleaning. If you cut the main line, the delay is 10 seconds. If you use the manual override in the basement service panel, the delay is 3 seconds. It's the service override. Domenico stared at her in the red light. The basement, yes, and the only people who have keys to the service panel are the staff, Domenico cursed. A traitor. Not just a traitor, Sophie said, pulling on his arm. If they are in the basement, they aren't coming up the main stairs. They're using the dumbwaiter shafts, the old laundry chutes. Domenico froze. The laundry chutes bypassed the security doors. They opened directly onto the second floor, right where they were standing. Clang. A metallic sound echoed from the hallway. The brass door of the laundry chute just 20 feet away. Get behind me, Domenico ordered, shoving Sophie behind the heavy oak bed frame. He raised his weapon, a custom matte black pistol, towards the door. The bedroom door exploded inward. Splinters of wood showered the room. 2 men in tactical gear stormed in suppressed rifles raised. They moved with professional precision. Domenico fired twice. Pop, pop. The first assailant dropped a hole in his visor. The second rolled behind the velvet chaise lounge, spraying bullets into the room. Vases shattered. The mirror exploded. Sophie screamed, covering her head as plaster rained down on her. Whiskers hissed from under the bed. Suppressive fire, the attacker shouted. He wasn't speaking Italian. He was speaking Russian. Domenico was pinned behind the heavy dresser. He couldn't move without exposing himself. The attacker was inching closer, flanking him. Sophie saw it. She saw the geometry of the room. The attacker was moving toward the spot where the floorboards were loose, the spot she had told the head housekeeper about, 3 times, the spot that squeaked like a dying mouse. She needed to warn Domenico, but if she shouted, the gunman would shoot her. She looked around. On the bedside table next to the lamp was a glass pitcher of water. Sophie didn't think. She grabbed the pitcher and hurled it not at the gunman, but at the wall opposite him. Smash! The sound distracted the gunman for a fraction of a second. He turned his head, and then he took a step. The loose floorboard groaned loudly under his heavy boot. Domenico didn't hesitate. He didn't need to see the man. He fired through the side of the chaise lounge, aiming purely at the sound of the squeak. The gunman grunted and collapsed, the rifle clattering to the floor. Silence returned, heavier than before. Domenico stood up, keeping his gun trained on the door. He walked over to the bodies, kicked the rifle away, and checked for a pulse. "Clear," he said. He turned to Sophie. She was trembling dust in her hair, clutching the bedpost. Domenico holstered his gun and crossed the room in 2 strides. He grabbed her shoulders, his eyes scanning her frantically. "Are you hit? Did they touch you?" I'm okay," she stuttered. The floorboard. I knew he would step on it. Domenico stared at her, incredulous. "You used a squeaky floorboard as a tactical marker." "I asked the housekeeper to fix it last week," Sophie said, a hysterical giggle bubbling up. "She said it wasn't in the budget." Domenico pulled her into his chest. It was a hard, fierce embrace. He smelled of gunpowder and sweat now. Sophie buried her face in his shirt, shaking. For the first time in her life, she felt small, but she didn't feel weak. She felt held. "Remind me to double the housekeeper's budget," Domenico growled into her hair. "And then fire her." Alessandro burst into the room a moment later, followed by 4 guards. They looked winded and panicked. "Boss, we lost the perimeter sensors. We thought—" Alessandro stopped when he saw the 2 dead Russians and Domenico holding the maid. "You're late, Al," Domenico said coldly, releasing Sophie but keeping a hand on her lower back. "Clean this up and lock down the estate. No one leaves. No one enters." "Boss, it was the new sous chef," Alessandro said, looking at the bodies. "We found him in the basement, throat slit. They took his keys." "They knew exactly where to go," Domenico said, his eyes darkening. "They knew about the shoots. They knew I was in the East Wing. This wasn't a raid, Al. It was an assassination." He looked down at Sophie. "And they knew she was here." Sophie felt a chill that had nothing to do with the broken window. "Me." "They didn't just want the book," Domenico said grimly. "They wanted the reader. If they couldn't kidnap you, they were going to kill you to make sure I couldn't use you." He turned to Alessandro. "Prepare the car, the armored SUV." "Where are we going, Dom?" "The safe house in the Hamptons." "No," Domenico said. "That's the first place they'll look. We're going somewhere they won't expect. Somewhere invisible." He looked at Sophie. "Pack a bag, Sophie. We're going to Queens." Sophie blinked. "Queens, my apartment." "It's the last place on earth a billionaire mafia don would be caught dead," Domenico said, "which makes it the safest place in the world right now. Grab the cat." The black SUV, stripped of its plates and tracking devices, idled in the alleyway behind a crumbling brick building in Astoria, Queens. The rain had turned the garbage-strewn street into a glossy, slick mess. Domenico Moretti stepped out. He was wearing a dark hoodie he had taken from one of his guards, but he wore it like it was a royal cloak. He looked at the peeling paint on the door, the rusted fire escape, and the overflowing dumpster. "This is it?" he asked, his voice neutral. "Home sweet home," Sophie said, clutching the cat carrier. She fumbled with her keys. "The elevator is broken. We have to walk up to the 4th floor." Domenico didn't complain. He grabbed the duffel bag filled with weapons and the ledger, and followed her up the narrow urine-scented stairwell. When they entered apartment 4B, the silence was deafening. It was tiny. The entire apartment could fit inside Domenico's master bathroom back at the estate. There was a kitchenette with a yellowing linoleum floor, a sagging couch that had seen better decades, and a window that looked directly into a brick wall. Domenico stood in the center of the room. He seemed to take up all the air. "It's cozy," he said finally. "It's cheap," Sophie corrected. She set Whiskers down, and the cat immediately ran under the couch. "I'll take the couch. You can have the bed." "I'm not taking your bed, Sophie. You're the boss. Also, you don't fit on the couch." Domenico walked over to the window and pulled the flimsy blinds down. "We are not boss and maid here. Out there, I am a target. In here, I am just a ghost. We share the space." He tossed the bag on the table, pushing aside a stack of unpaid bills. "We need to work. The map." For the next 4 hours, the dynamic shifted in a way neither of them expected. In the library of the manor, Domenico was the master. But here he was, helpless. "How do you turn this stove on?" he asked, frowning at the gas range. "You have to jiggle the knob and use a match," Sophie said, not looking up from the ledger. She was cross-referencing the musical notes with a topographical map of 1920s Manhattan she had pulled up on her cracked laptop. Domenico, a man who commanded an army of killers, looked defeated by a pilot light. Sophie sighed, got up, lit the stove, and put a pot of water on. "I'm making mac and cheese," she said. "It's all I have." They ate in silence, sitting on the floor, because the table was covered in maps. Domenico Moretti eating neon orange pasta from a chipped bowl. "This is..." Domenico paused, searching for the word. "Processed," Sophie suggested. "Salty," he concluded. He looked at her. The harsh overhead light of the apartment should have been unflattering, but instead it made her look real, tangible. "Why do you live like this, Sophie? You're brilliant. You fixed the boiler at the estate without asking. You cracked a code MIT professors couldn't. You could be working for NASA." Sophie poked at her pasta. "My dad got sick. The medical bills wiped us out. Then he took the loan from Vinny to pay for the surgery. He died anyway. I inherited the debt, not the degree." Domenico went quiet. He reached out his hand, covering hers on the floor. His palm was warm, rough, and protective. "You have no debt," he said firmly. "And when this is over, you will never live in a place where the stove doesn't work again." Sophie looked up at him. The air in the tiny room grew heavy, charged with the same electricity as the library, but more intimate. He wasn't the Don here. He was just a man who was tired and being hunted. "Domenico," she whispered. He leaned in. His eyes dropped to her lips. "We found it," she blurted out, pulling her hand away and pointing at the map. Domenico blinked the spell breaking. He cleared his throat and looked at the laptop screen. "What? The first coordinate?" Sophie said, her voice shaky. "The notes. The triplet cluster in the bass clef. It corresponds to the foundation depth of the old City Hall subway station." "City Hall station?" Domenico frowned. "It's been closed since 1945. It's sealed tight." "Not for the Russian," Sophie said. "Look at the time signature. 4 time. But the fourth beat is a rest, a silence." Track 4, Domenico realized. The service track that runs parallel to the main line. It was never finished. "Exactly," Sophie said, her eyes shining with the thrill of the hunt. "The vault isn't in a bank. It's in the wall of the subway tunnel. We have to go underground." Domenico stood up. The romance was gone, replaced by the soldier. He checked his watch. 3 a.m. The subways are quietest now. We go tonight. He reached into the duffel bag and pulled out a Kevlar vest. He held it out to her. Put this on. I'm coming with you. You're the only one who knows what to look for, Domenico said. He strapped a holster to his chest. And I'm not leaving you alone. Not after tonight. The access point was a maintenance hatch in a janitor's closet off the active Brooklyn Bridge City Hall station platform. Domenico picked the lock in 3 seconds. He ushered Sophie inside and closed the door behind them. The air was cool and smelled of steel dust and old electricity. They descended a rusted ladder into the gloom. Stay close, Domenico whispered. He had a tactical flashlight mounted on his gun, the beam cutting through the darkness. They walked along the tracks. The rumble of trains passing on the active lines above vibrated in their chests. Rats scurried away from the light. After 20 minutes of walking, the tunnel widened. They had reached the old City Hall station. It was hauntingly beautiful arched tile ceilings, brass chandeliers, covered in decades of grime and curved platforms that had once welcomed the elite of New York. It's a ghost town, Sophie whispered. Over there, Domenico pointed. On the far wall of Track 4, hidden behind a pile of rotted wooden sleepers, was a section of tiling that didn't match the rest. The tiles were darker. Obsidian. The Russian, Domenico murmured. He moved the heavy wooden beams aside with a grunt of effort. Beneath them was a seamless panel of black stone, identical to the box in the library. No rings this time, Sophie said, stepping forward. She ran her fingers over the stone. It's a pressure plate. It needs a specific harmonic resonance. English, Sophie. It needs a sound, she said, a specific pitch. She remembered the ledger, the music. The first note of the sequence wasn't just a coordinate. It was a key. A low C, she said. Hum a low C. I don't sing, Domenico said flatly. Just do it. Like a monk. Om. Domenico looked at her, looked at the stone and sighed. He leaned close to the stone and hummed a deep, resonant note. The sound vibrated in the small alcove. Click. The stone panel popped open. Inside there was no gold, no diamonds. There was a single silver hard drive. Domenico grabbed it. Technology. In 1927. No, Sophie said, realizing the horror. The box is from 1927. The drive is modern. Someone has been here. Recently. Suddenly, a bright floodlight blinded them from the platform above. Drop the gun, Dom, a voice boomed. Domenico reacted instantly, shielding Sophie with his body and aiming his weapon at the light. I said drop it. Domenico froze. He knew that voice. Alessandro. From the shadows of the arched platform, Alessandro stepped out. He wasn't alone. He was flanked by 6 men, heavily armed with military-grade rifles. But they weren't Russians. They were Domenico's own men. I'm sorry, boss, Alessandro said, his face twisted in a mix of regret and greed. But the Russians offered me something you never could. What? Domenico snarled, not lowering his gun. Money. You have money. Peace, Alessandro said. They offered me an exit. You were going to fight this war forever. I'm tired, Dom. I want out. So you sell me to the Bratva. I sell the drive, Alessandro said, and I bury the loose ends. Put the gun down. Don't make me kill the girl first. Domenico's hand tightened on the grip of his pistol. He looked at the odds. 7 against 1. He had Sophie behind him. If he fired, they would turn the tunnel into a kill box. Sophie, Domenico whispered, barely moving his lips. Run! What? When I move, you run back to the ladder. Don't look back. Domenico, no. Give me the drive, Al, Domenico shouted, stepping forward, drawing the attention away from Sophie. Toss it up here, Alessandro yelled. Domenico reached into his pocket. He pulled out the silver drive. He held it up, the light glinting off the metal. You want it? Domenico roared. Fetch! He didn't throw it to Alessandro. He threw it onto the third rail, the electrified rail that powered the trains. Zap! A massive arc of blue electricity exploded as the metal drive made contact. Sparks showered the tunnel like fireworks. The drive fried instantly, smoking and melting. No! Alessandro screamed. Now! Domenico yelled. He didn't fire at Alessandro. He fired at the old rusted chandelier hanging directly above Alessandro's head. The chain snapped. The massive brass fixture crashed down onto the platform, crushing two of the guards and sending Alessandro scrambling back. Run! Domenico grabbed Sophie's hand, and they sprinted back into the darkness of the service tunnel. Kill them! Alessandro shrieked from behind them. Kill them both! Bullets whizzed past their heads, sparking against the tunnel walls. Sophie's lungs burned. She stumbled over a loose rail tie, but Domenico yanked her up, never slowing down. They know the exit, Sophie gasped. They'll cut us off at the ladder. We aren't going to the ladder, Domenico shouted over the roar of an approaching train on the main line. Where are we going? The main line. They burst out of the service tunnel and onto the active track. The lights of a subway train were barreling toward them, a screaming monster of steel and light. Domenico! Sophie screamed. Trust me. He pulled her into a small alcove in the wall, a safety niche for track workers. He pressed her back against the slimy concrete, covering her body with his. The train roared past them. The wind was ferocious, tearing at their clothes. The noise was deafening, a wall of sound that vibrated their very bones. Domenico's face was inches from hers. He was staring into her eyes, fierce and alive. The train carriages flashed by, clack, 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 clack. Through the gaps between the cars, they saw the flashlights of Alessandro's men on the other side of the tracks, confused, unable to cross. As the last car zoomed by, Domenico didn't wait. Move! He dragged her across the tracks behind the disappearing train, heading deeper into the tunnel, toward the next station. Brooklyn Bridge. They ran until their legs gave out. They ran until the lights of the Brooklyn Bridge station appeared. They scrambled up onto the platform, blending into a crowd of late-night commuters. Domenico pulled his hood up. Sophie hid her face in his shoulder. They exited the station and collapsed into a yellow taxicab. Drive, Domenico rasped. Just drive. Where to? The cabbie asked. Domenico looked at Sophie. They were muddy, wet, and shaking. They had lost the drive. They had lost the estate. They had lost the army. But Domenico was smiling, a cold, terrifying smile. The drive was a decoy, he whispered to Sophie. Sophie looked at him, eyes wide. What? The Russian was paranoid, Domenico said, leaning back. He wouldn't put the data on a drive. That was for the greedy. He tapped his own temple. You memorized the map, Sophie. The music. There were 2 locations, weren't there? Sophie thought back to the ledger. The music didn't end at the City Hall station. There was a coda, a final few notes. The lighthouse, she realized. The little red lighthouse under the George Washington Bridge. Alessandro thinks he won, Domenico said, taking her hand and kissing her knuckles, ignoring the blood and dirt. He thinks he destroyed the data. He'll tell the Russians I'm dead or running. He'll lower his guard. And then, Sophie asked. And then, Domenico said, we go to the lighthouse, we get the real weapon, and I take back my city. The cab dropped them off near Fort Washington Park. The storm had passed, leaving behind a thick, suffocating fog that rolled off the Hudson River. Looming above them, the George Washington Bridge was a titan of steel, its lights swallowed by the mist. Below it, tiny and defiant, stood the little red lighthouse. It's smaller than I thought, Domenico muttered, checking the magazine of his pistol. He had 3 rounds left. It's not about size, Sophie said, her voice steady. She was no longer the frightened girl scrubbing floors. She was a woman on a mission. It's about the light, the coda in the music. It ended with a fermata over a high G, a sustained note, a beacon. They picked their way down the rocky path. The lighthouse was dark, abandoned for the night. The heavy iron door was rusted shut. Domenico moved to kick it, but Sophie stopped him. No force, she whispered. The Russian valued intellect. Look at the keyhole. It wasn't a standard keyhole. It was a hexagonal slot. The bolt from the subway, Sophie realized. She dug into her pocket. When the false drive had sparked and melted, a small piece of the casing had broken off. It was a hexagonal rod of titanium. She had grabbed it instinctively. She slid the rod into the hole. It fit perfectly. She turned it. Groan. The gears inside the door, ancient and thirsty for oil, ground against each other. The door swung open. They stepped inside. The spiral staircase wound up into the darkness. Up, Domenico commanded. They climbed the 48 steps to the lantern room. The great glass lens dominated the space, cold and dark. But at the base of the lens there was a compartment. Sophie knelt. Engraved on the brass plate were the words, "For those who can see in the dark." She pressed the panel. It clicked open. Inside lay a single translucent diamond, the size of a golf ball, and a small microfilm reel. The Romanov star. Domenico breathed his eyes wide. It was stolen in 1918. It's priceless. And the microfilm, the names, Sophie said, holding the reel up to the moonlight. Not bank accounts, identities. Every corrupt politician, every judge, every spy the Russian syndicate owned. This is the leverage to run the world. Or to burn it down. A voice sneered from the stairs. Domenico spun around, shielding Sophie. Alessandro stood at the top of the stairs, panting. His suit was ruined, his face bloodied from the falling chandelier. Behind him, the massive frame of the Russian boss, Viktor Volkov, squeezed into the small room. "You are hard to kill, Moretti," Volkov rumbled, raising a heavy revolver. "But nowhere is far enough." "How did you find us?" Domenico demanded. "The cat." Alessandro laughed, a cruel, wet sound. "The carrier has a chip. You tracked your enemy's dom. Did you forget we track your pets too?" Sophie felt cold. She had brought whiskers. She had led them here. "Give me the stone and the film," Volkov demanded, "and I will make it quick." Domenico looked at the heavy revolver pointed at his chest. He looked at Alessandro, the brother who betrayed him. Then he looked at Sophie. "Sophie," he said softly. "The light." Volkov laughed. "The light is dead, fool." But Sophie understood. The fermata, the sustained note. The lighthouse mechanism wasn't electric. It was clockwork, a gravity drive. Sophie was standing next to the massive counterweight cable. "You want the stone?" Sophie asked, holding the diamond up. It caught the moonlight, mesmerizing Volkov. "Give it to me, girl." "Catch," she whispered. She tossed the diamond not at Volkov, but into the gears of the rotating lens. "No!" Volkov lunged forward to save the priceless stone. At the exact same moment, Sophie pulled the release lever for the gravity weight. Clang! The massive iron counterweight, weighing nearly a ton, dropped down the central shaft. The gears engaged with a scream of metal. The lens began to spin violently, fueled by the sudden release of kinetic energy. The diamond, caught in the brass teeth of the gears, acted like a wedge. It didn't break. It shattered the gear mechanism. Crack, boom! The heavy Fresnel lens, spinning out of control and jammed by the hardest substance on Earth, tore free from its mounting. It swung around like a wrecking ball in the cramped room. Volkov, reaching for the gem, was struck squarely in the chest by the heavy brass housing of the lens. He was thrown backward, crashing into Alessandro. Both men tumbled down the steep spiral iron stairs, a tangle of limbs and screams echoing down the shaft. The lighthouse shook as the lens crashed into the wall, shattering into a million pieces of glass that rained down like diamonds. Silence returned. Domenico walked to the edge of the stairs. He looked down. The fall had been fatal. He turned back to Sophie. She was standing amidst the broken glass, the microfilm reel clutched in her hand. The Romana star lay on the floor, chipped but intact. "You destroyed $100 million diamond to use as a wrench," Domenico said, a look of pure awe on his face. "It was the hardest thing in the room." Sophie shrugged, shaking the glass from her hair. "Physics." Domenico walked over to her. He didn't care about the diamond. He didn't care about the dead men on the stairs. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs wiping away a smudge of grease on her cheek. "I have spent my life looking for soldiers," he whispered. "I never knew I needed a queen." "I'm still just a maid, Domenico," she said, her breath hitching. "No," he said, leaning down until their foreheads touched. "You are the woman who solved the impossible. You are the woman who saved my life. Twice." He kissed her. It wasn't the tentative kiss of the apartment. It was a claim, a promise. It tasted of rain, adrenaline, and victory. When they broke apart, Domenico picked up the microfilm. "With this," he said, "we rebuild, but not the old way. No more fear. We run this city with intelligence." He offered her his hand. "Are you ready to quit your cleaning job, Sophie Miller?" Sophie looked at her hand, rough-scarred, stained with labor. Then she looked at his. "I think I'm ready for a promotion." She smiled. She took his hand. The library of Blackwood Manor had changed. The heavy curtains were gone, replaced by sheer linen that let the sunlight pour in. The smell of stale cigar smoke was replaced by fresh lilies. Sophie sat at the mahogany desk, the same desk where she had once stood, terrified with a bucket. She was wearing a tailored cream suit. Whiskers was asleep on a silk pillow on the corner of the desk. Mrs. Moretti, Alessandro's replacement, a sharp young woman named Clara, stood at the door. "The meeting with the senator is in 10 minutes, and the construction crew for the new wing needs your approval on the blueprints." "Tell the senator to wait," Sophie said, not looking up from her laptop. "And tell the foreman that the load-bearing wall on the west side is insufficient. Increase the steel reinforcement by 20%, or the roof will collapse in 5 years." "Yes, ma'am." Domenico walked in. He looked rested, the dark circles gone. He leaned against the doorframe, watching her work. "You're terrifying," he said, a smile playing on his lips. "I'm efficient," Sophie corrected, closing the laptop. Domenico walked over and spun her chair around. The senator can wait. I have a more important question. Oh, the safe in the basement, Domenico said. The one from the 1800s. I can't get it open. I tried the stethoscope, the drill. Nothing. Sophie laughed. She stood up, smoothing her suit. She kissed her husband, the most dangerous man in New York, who was now completely wrapped around her little finger. Did you try kicking it? She asked. Kicking it, bottom left corner. The hinge is rusted. A good kick resets the tumblers. Domenico stared at her. I love you. I know. Sophie grinned, picking up the cat. Now let's go make a senator sweat. They walked out of the library together hand in hand, leaving the ghosts of the past behind them. The experts had failed. The Maid had won. And the Mafia boss. He had surrendered to the only force stronger than fear. Love. And a really smart woman. And that is how Sophie Miller went from scrubbing floors to ruling the underworld. It turns out sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't a gun. It's a brain that sees what others miss. If you loved this story of twists, betrayal, and romance, please smash that like button. Let's try to get this video to 10,000 likes. If you were, Sophie, would you have thrown the diamond into the gears, or would you have tried to keep it? Let me know in the comments down below. If you want more stories like this, maybe a sequel where Sophie and Domenico take on the European syndicates, make sure you subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss a video. I upload new stories every week. Thanks for watching, and remember, never underestimate the person in the corner of the room. See you in the next one.